Thank you for joining us for this episode of Recipe Share, a program on AADL TV where we take a few minutes to talk about recipes in a featured category. Today's category is favorite cookies. I'm Katie, and as usual, I'm joined today by Elizabeth and Beth to tell us about their recipes. So Beth, tell us what you chose this week.
Okay, well, I was looking for different, cookies that might be not my favorite, but I ended up landing on chocolate chip cookies. In that way, though, I found this really kind of nifty book, 100 Cookies. I decided to level it up a little, and it's used brown butter. And so it's brown butter chocolate chip cookies. Half a stick is brown butter and the rest is your regular butter, and you mix it in. It was very labor intensive just in terms of the process of the cookies, like doing only, what was it, like eight at a time on the pan and flipping it halfway. So 5 minutes in, flip, and they turned out really beautifully. I do have a picture. And the other thing I did, this recipe called for an 8-ounce bar of bittersweet chocolate. And I was just at CVS, so I was like, they didn't, and I wanted dark chocolate. They did have regular chocolate chips there, but so I decided to just get some of those little mini Dove bar, bites, and open that up, chopped a few up, not nearly as many as they called for, but it was very good that way. But in terms of just the length of time and all that it took, I would say stick with the drop cookie for sure. I mean, I'd probably, well, I probably wouldn't even use the Dove bar things again. I would just, we usually do try to get dark chocolate chips from Costco. So, so it was very tasty, but listen, I still have one and I made them on Saturday. So if I still have one, why? Why is there still, and I did purposely save one for today, but it just wasn't initially they were good, but not worth the trouble. So that's my story. Oh, but and then it also, I always have an after, but it called for fleur de sel, which is salt. So I sprinkled a little sea salt on it, and that was good. And I think I would probably do that with any chocolate chip cookie I make now. So any questions about the old brown butter chocolate chip cookie?
I have a question, Beth. Can you talk about brown butter? I don't actually know what that is now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay, so you just brown the butter, just the way they describe it is so it just begins to get a little nutty scent to it. And there's a lot of ways you can use brown butter, and I think it adds that another kind of layer of flavor, that nuttiness.
So you put it in a pan for like a few minutes and just
melted it, and then you pour it into with the regular butter, mix it all up, and so it all kind of gets brown. But again, it's barely worth the effort, in my opinion. Now, that said, I'm not saying that brown butter itself isn't something. I know there's a brown butter ice cream from Go Ice Cream, and so I think it's got its place, but why ruin a good thing? Not ruin, but reinvent the wheel. So any other questions? Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Elizabeth now.
Thanks, Beth. So I was actually dreading this episode because I am not a dessert person, and I'm also not a baker. I love to cook, but I don't enjoy like baking cakes, cookies, breads. That's just like not something I like, I think, because it tends to be fairly precise and like with measuring. I also don't have a stand mixer, so I don't do a lot with that. And anyway, and I don't crave desserts very much. So I was trying to think of what to do for this that I would actually enjoy. So I busted out my trusty recipe box, which is actually, I copied a bunch of recipes from my mom when I was younger. So this is just like full of some of her recipes. And I flipped to the dessert section and found these cookies that I remember her making a ton that I love. And they're basically chocolate chip pumpkin spice cookies on this little recipe card. And it's not very in season because it's summer and they have pumpkin in them, but I really like them. And they're not anything super crazy. They're basically chocolate chip cookies, but you do add a can of pumpkin. And you also add in some chopped walnuts and chopped pecans. So that kind of makes them just really textural and adds, I think, kind of to that fall flavor a bit. And then the chocolate chips. And there's some cinnamon and nutmeg that adds some really nice spice in there. So I made a batch. They turned out really well. It was super easy. It was just like I remembered my mom making them. I actually threw in some dried cherries just because I had some and I really like that kind of fruit flavor it mixed in with the dark chocolate that like tastes really good to me. So I did that, although the recipe does not call for that. And it was delicious. I cut the recipe in half because, again, not super into desserts, but they were super good and also made a really good kind of like snack because they almost like, they're definitely sweet. I don't think that they're like good for you, but they with the nuts and the dried cherries and the chocolate and then the pumpkin flavor, it almost like seems kind of like a granola bar, even though it's not. So I ended up having like one or two of them before I went running, just because it was like a nice little pop of sugar and gave me a little bit of energy before I did that. And I was really happy that I made these. They're small too, like they are drop cookies, and it's really just like a teaspoon, like a heaping teaspoon, and you just plunk it on. So you have to bake them in batches. Like the recipe that I got from my mom says that it makes 60 cookies, so it makes a lot. But I cut it in half. Anyway, I would make them again, actually. I was like happy to rediscover them. They were really good. I think I would make them again maybe in the fall, because it did seem kind of, and also baking in the summer to me, like you have the oven on and it's just like hot, and like we don't have air conditioning. So I was just not delighted by that, but they are very good. I would recommend them. And especially in the fall, they're like really, they feel really seasonal and yummy. So that is my chocolate chip pumpkin spice cookies with nuts and dried cherries, but that was extra.
That sounds really, really good.
Yeah, really easy to incorporate. I mean, it goes to show you how much you can do with the chocolate chip cookie, you know. Did you say you use canned pumpkin?
Yep, I just used it. It's a 15-ounce can of pumpkin. So that was for the full recipe. So I used like a little more than half of it for this one. But honestly, that ended up just being a pain because I didn't know what to do with the other half of a can of pumpkin. So I would just make the whole recipe. But yeah, just a can of pumpkin.
We processed pumpkins last fall actually and put them in the freezer. So I do have pumpkin stuff. And you're right, I didn't really like to bake in the summer, but it's not too bad. You know, this past weekend wasn't too bad. So anyway, sounds delicious. And with the cherries too.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I really like that you added cherries to it. That sounds like it would really like sort of up the flavor. And it made me think that you could put dried cranberries in there too, and it would be like a Thanksgiving cookie, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That would be really good. So yeah. Cool. So that's mine. And Katie, I'm excited to hear about yours.
All right. Well, I also chose a chocolate chip cookie. So this recipe that I am sharing today, I actually originally found it online. But they cited their source, which ended up being a book that we had at the library. So I checked it out. It's called Healthier Together. They're recipes for two to nourish your body and nourish your relationships. So the concept of this book is that you're to cook the recipes with a partner. That's really cute, but I have a skinny galley kitchen, so it's not really practical. So I've been making recipes from this book by myself, and they're working out okay. The recipe that I'm sharing, if I can flip to it, is the best healthy chocolate chip cookie. And I like this recipe a lot because it's gluten-free, grain-free, refined sugar-free, and dairy-free. And I also don't do a whole lot of baking because generally what I make needs to be gluten-free. And I find that gluten-free baking can be very fussy. Often you need several different kinds of flours or some unusual ingredients. And I usually just read it and I'm like, no, not happening. But this recipe just uses almond flour, which is a pretty accessible ingredient. I think you can get at most grocery stores. So that was attractive to me. The author of this recipe says that you can just use a large spoon and a bowl to beat all the ingredients together, but I did use my stand mixer. I think it just makes things so much easier when you're dealing with dough. So it is easy though. It's just 3 sort of steps. First, you put in the egg, vanilla, and almond butter till it's combined. Then almond flour, salt, coconut sugar, and baking soda until that's combined. And then you put in walnuts, oats, and chocolate chips until like that's all well distributed. It's a drop cookie, so you just put it on your parchment paper lined cookie sheet, bake it for 10 to 15 minutes. So it's pretty quick, which was good too, because I didn't want to have the oven on all that long either. And then you just let them cool. Couple of notes that I made was I did add a little bit more salt to this recipe because I really like a salty chocolate chip cookie. Like, gotta have salt for me on a chocolate chip cookie. And actually sprinkling a little bit on top probably would have been good too. So good tip. I'll do that next time. And then I learned a little bit about almond butter as I was making these. The first batch that I ever made, I was using the sort of end of the jar of almond butter. So it was not very oily. And it made these really like big fluffy cookies. And I took pictures. So I'll show you what I'm talking about as I'm describing this. And then the second time I made these cookies, I was using sort of the very new jar of almond butter that was very oily, and my cookies just flattened straight out. They were very like flat, crispy cookies, like completely different than the first batch that I made. So it was kind of wild. They still tasted good, but I like a little fluffier rather than crispy cookie. So went in and made them a third time. This time was sure to really stir up the almond butter, get that oil incorporated, and ended up with sort of a mixture of the two, somewhere in a happy medium of the crispy and fluffy cookies. So it was a good experience. The author said that oftentimes she'll eat these for breakfast because they do sort of have that like oat granola sort of feel to them. And I took these on a hiking trip and they were a good energy booster for that too. So overall, a very good take on your classic chocolate chip cookie.
We're so original. That's funny. But I'm not surprised just because everyone loves a chocolate chip cookie. Well, maybe not everyone, but yeah, those. So you said they had oatmeal in them too?
Just there's oats in them. So when you add in the walnuts and the chocolate chips, also put in some oats. And I think it just gives it a nice little texture.
Yeah.
Maybe you said this, Katie, and I can't remember. What was this? Like, is there what's the sweetener? Is there a sweetener?
Yes, coconut sugar.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yep. So it's an unrefined light brown coconut sugar.
Does that give it a coconut flavor or not really?
No, it just tastes
Okay.
and if you stick your finger in it, to me, it doesn't have a coconut flavor. It just tastes
Okay.
Cool.
Well, that sounds really good and interesting. I don't need to be gluten-free, so I don't really think about baking that way, but those sound really good and like healthy to eat.
Healthy-ish, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty healthy. Pretty
Yeah.
healthy.
Okay, well, we want to thank you all for watching Recipe Share. Be sure to click the link below to look at the event page on aadl.org to find the recipes that we talked about and share your own in the comments. Join us next time for a very special episode in celebration of the Ann Arbor District Library's Big Gay Read, where we'll be talking about rainy day soups. We're looking forward to seeing what you've been making, so thanks for sharing.